right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the PetroNerds Podcast. My name is Trisha Curtis, and I am the CEO of PetroNerds and the host of the PetroNerds Podcast. This is episode 152 of the PetroNerds Podcast, and we have a lot of ground to cover because today is March 12th, 2026. It is Thursday, and we are 13 days into the war in Iran. And so oil prices right now are $96 a barrel. And today I am joined by Jason Isaac. He's the head of the and president of the American Energy Institute. I am the chief economist with American Energy Institute. And I brought him on today because we haven't sat down and talked for a while. And clearly there's a lot to talk about with this war in Iran and where oil prices are at. And just me sitting here talking to you guys, it's hard because there's a lot to cover. And so I've asked Jason to join me and help sort of give some guardrails around me. He has a great perspective as being a former representative. And so, Jason, welcome to the PetroNerds Podcast.
Trisha, great to be back on. Yeah, thanks for having me back on again. It seems like the last time we were talking, we were hearing about oil executives going into the White House and the president trying to push $50 a barrel of oil, and some of our members thinking that might be a little too low for job and economic opportunities, and drilling, drill baby drill, because the price gets too low and the drills stop turning into the ground. But we were really trying to put some pressure on electric utilities, and because electric utility costs have gone up, gas prices at the pump have gone down significantly over the last year, even though they've ticked up recently. But here we are just a short bit later, and we're dealing with this conflict in Iran, and how things have changed now. The people on the left, you've got Democrat governors and Democrat representatives from around the country, are screaming about the increase in cost of energy, how gas have gone up 30 cents in their states, when they weren't worried about this during the last administration, when they were much higher. So how times have changed.
They really have. And, I think that, so just to start this off, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people. I was out of the office when this happened. And so I did a lot of field work in terms of sending a lot of voice texts to clients and going through stuff. And I think we talked, or at least I was messaging with you. And my initial response, folks. So today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. WTI is $96.39. And we're going to recap and talk about what Jason just mentioned. But Brent is 101.28. So Brent oil prices are above $100 a barrel. I have seen a round trip on Sunday night. I was in a different time zone, and I was up and I saw oil prices hit 120, and I woke up and they were in the low 80s. So they nearly round trip $40. So we have incredible trading volatility with oil, and we're going to get into that as well. Henry Hub, importantly, is $3.24. Okay. Not very high for Henry Hub, $3.24. But Dutch TTF, that is European natural gas prices per MCF, are $17.20. So you want to know who this is hurting in terms of this is not just oil when we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz effectively being closed. This is natural gas as well. This is LNG, particularly because Qatar cannot export their LNG through the Strait of Hormuz anymore. The 10-year yield got this one wrong as well. In the first days, I'll talk about my predictions and what I was telling Jason. But the 10-year yield, we're looking at 4.261%, and we're looking at mortgage rates back above 6%, so 6.11% to 6.23% right now is what mortgage rates are, your 30-year. And you've got gold sitting around $5,000 an ounce. So we started this on February 28th. I believe it's Saturday, February 28th is when the United States hit and Israel hit Iran and took out the Ayatollah Khomeini. I am massively supportive of that. He was a horrible man, and this is a really atrocious dictatorship. And so the leader's out, and since now we are literally 13 days from that standpoint, and that's what I want to really bring people back to. So you're hearing the news and people are asking about oil prices. I just want everyone to remind themselves, and we're less than 2 weeks into this war. Okay. So if you think you have a magic crystal ball and you know exactly where our price is going to be 2 months from now, good luck. Because a lot can happen in this period. So we're 2 weeks in, and we started this out. I thought the first weekend on Sunday night, this is the oil price we're seeing today at $96 a barrel, that's what we should have seen Sunday night after this when the market opened. And that is because we had attacks on airports. We had attacks on Iran attacked their regional allies. And I don't know if Iran technically has allies. I mean, they have, Russia's obviously an ally, North Korea's an ally, China's an ally. But in terms of the region, I don't think Dubai was ready to have themselves, to be attacked, or nor Qatar. And I mean, so on the first opening night, you had the Dubai airport attacked. You've had a lot of folks in the region. You have a lot of airports that are still closed. Just recently, we've had the multiple airports to Dubai, Kuwait. Last night, we had Oman. Oman preemptively closed their port that is not the Strait of Hormuz, where they were exporting oil. They preemptively closed that because of attacks. You had two ships in Iraqi waters that were attacked, and Bahrain was hit as well. And you have a lot of Gulf airports shut. And thus far, the response in the region by Qatar and these other nations, if you're listening to BBC and others, I don't think the stock market's covering it very well. Their response, the regional players, is to say, we're not going to retaliate because we don't want to escalate this. I don't know if this can last very long because of that, right? Because you have Iran, this belligerent actor that's going out and attacking their neighbors, attacking desalination facilities in Bahrain, serious escalation. And thus far, the regional response is to just do nothing. How long you can maintain that? I think there's real risk that Iran is attacking their neighbors and they get more than the U.S. and Israel involved. And they say, we got to put an end to this because we have to start exporting our products. The economic constraint is the cost is simply too high. And so I think we have a lot of variables at play right now. I think that's a massive risk to Iran. It's a huge gamble. And effectively right now, the Strait of Hormuz, for all intents and purposes, is closed. If you look at the latest map from the Institute for Study of War, basically they're hitting every civilian vessel. Importantly, Chinese vessels, which are sending Iranian crude to China, are still moving through the Strait of Hormuz. So that is still happening. So if you want to know who's winning in this game, it is China.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Iran attacking their neighbors, but you had a great op-ed published. I think it was published the last day of January in the Daily Signal. I republished it on my Substack, jasonisaac.substack.com, talking about they were finally starting to price in the volatility of oil with the conflicts in Iran. And this is pre-conflict, pre-attack from Israel and the United States. But not only is Iran attacking their neighbors, they're also attacking their own. And your op-ed had numbers as high as 20,000 of their own citizens killed by this terrorist regime. That number could be as high as 40,000 now as we get more information.
Exactly.
They're killing protesters for doing something that we take for granted here in the United States. You have some organic, I say, celebrations. They're really not protests that have happened since then in cities around this country. We have the right to free speech. And I like to say the term organic because these are people, Iranians here across our country, gathering in cities and celebrating that the Ayatollah has been taken out. This dictator, this terrorist dictator has been taken out, committing the greatest atrocities that we've seen since World War II. So just to see that have any kind of comparison like that is unimaginable. And I was trying to find some Truth Social posts from President Trump, but it says, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. That's from January of earlier this year. So it's not like anyone didn't see this coming. And then you finally stated at the end of January, they were finally starting to price in that volatility. Then March 1st,
Barely.
West Texas was trading at 67. Yeah, barely starting to trade it in or to price it in. So, why do you think those oil markets failed to price in that geopolitical risk leading up to this conflict?
So that's a great question. And I think we have a lot of ground to cover on that because I do want to loop back to these atrocities within Iran and put this in context as that we have 40,000 people plus dead. That's what they did before this war broke out. They're hitting their regional allies who aren't hitting them back. What do you think they're doing to their own people right now? I mean, you can't utter a word against this regime. And by the way, we don't even know who's in charge. We've had a lot of back and forth within Iran. We don't know supposedly, Ayatollah Khamenei's the man that was killed, the leader of Iran that was killed, his son is now in charge. However, we haven't seen a lot of coverage of him. Now, he has more children than just this one son, although apparently this son is supposedly worse than his dad in terms of being
Mm-hmm.
extremists, which they're all, extremists. But it's unclear whether he's calling the shots. It's the IRGC. Clearly, the leaders are calling the shots, and they're on the far band of, let's do everything like crazy and just blow it all up. And this is the cards we're going to play. But the guy that is supposedly the now leader, we haven't seen him in the media. And BBC has covered a little bit of this where he's probably injured. And so if he is, maybe he can't walk, who knows what it is. But it's unclear who's leading because over the past weekend, you had folks in Iran come out and say, hey, we apologize for hitting our regional neighbors, and we're not going to continue to do that unless they strike us. And then that was walked back, and they've continued to hit their regional allies. So there's just questions on that leadership, and there's a lot of questions with what's actually happening. But if we rewind this and say, okay, and this is so important because, look, we're at $96 a barrel now, and I want to know why people were so complacent, why the market was so complacent in the $60. Also, we supposedly had this supply glut. Where is that glut right now?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no one's talking about that glut. And this is where I'm being very objectively honest, folks. I'm watching the stock market. I'm listening to every podcast I can. And I have to say, there's a leftist bias on this where, this was everybody's calling for, oil prices to go to the moon and that they're never going to recover. They're never going to go back to their pre-war levels until 2027. I got a newsflash for you folks. This president really does want lower oil prices. And so clearly this is something that they decided to attack Iran. They know that there's going to be a risk to higher oil prices. I don't think that, obviously they don't intend this to be a long fought out war. And I would say, give it a couple months. We probably need to give this at least 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. And potentially if you have high oil prices for that time and then they come back, that's what we're sort of looking at. And probably, I don't know, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the administration, but that's probably what they're thinking about as well, is that we could have some short-term spikes in oil prices, but we would come back. And so the idea, though, that we can't come back, now that's where there's a lot of confusion in the market is, where we're at for oil prices and where we can't come back to. And so I think the oil analysts, some of them have kind of lost their way because we had the seizure of Maduro in the first week of January and oil prices went down. That was amazing, right? Oil prices should have absolutely went up, not because it wasn't, we didn't do this effective, capture of Maduro, but because it's just geopolitical risk. It should have increased oil prices and it didn't. And people got up on TV and they said, hey, the market's got this right. The market directionally has this right. Oil should sell off because maybe down the road someday we will get increases from Iran or increase from Venezuela. Well, we could potentially get increases from Venezuela, but not overnight, right? So the way the oil prices were, they were basically just wanting to sell off at anything. So any kind of news was a sell-off point, and peace was going to break out all over the world and we're going to sell off. And so the stock market wasn't appropriately pricing any geopolitical risk in, but clearly the oil market wasn't as well. And so this supposed glut on the water, no one seems to be talking about it now. And even IEA today, they put in their report that there's billions of barrels, billions of barrels of storage. Now, part of that is that we have a lot of storage in China. China has a massive amount of crude oil storage. And, I don't hear anyone getting on TV and saying, hey, China, can you stop filling your SPR right now? No one's getting up and saying that because about 2 million barrels a day of their imports is going to strategic reserves. They do not intend to use that right now. This is not what they want to use their SPR for. They are intending to have their SPR for their own stuff in the future. And they have a lot of crude oil and they are stockpiling.
They're still stockpiling it, even though they're having the gas lines for fueling stations like we had in the 70s. I'm seeing some reports of that happening already. So it seems like there's some
So there's a lot there is that we're starting to see that. And I think we have to be a little bit careful is that we are off. We clearly have lost about 8 to 10 million barrels a day of production, right? There's about 8 to 10 million barrels a day that's shut in. The Strait of Hormuz moved about 20 million barrels a day of crude and product. And for all intents and purposes, it is shut. So you're getting a trickle that's coming out, and that is Iranian stuff that's going to China. And that's just because any civilian vessel they will attack, and they have attacked. So nobody can move through there. So you've got 8 to 10 million barrels a day shut in. That does mean we have to offset 8 to 10 million barrels a day. Now, here in the US, we're more insulated because we're producing 14 million barrels a day. We're exporting 4 million barrels a day. We're taking in a lot of Canadian crude. We're not getting a lot of crude from the Middle East, but Asia's not. And so there's a big fear factor. So Japan is definitely very vulnerable. These countries in Asia are vulnerable. And so they would have an immediate impact, right? That 8 to 10 million barrels a day is going to impact them pretty quickly. And so that partly that filling though at the pump, that's fear driven. And in the second oil price shock, that I just want to remind listeners that in the 70s, that was more fear driven. We weren't as supply. The first one was a real supply issue. The second one was a perceived supply issue. And so I'm not saying we don't have supply issues now, but I think that they're being they're perceived to be higher than they actually are in the moment, right? And so we had yesterday or last night, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, said that we're doing a 400 million barrel release from strategic petroleum reserves. This includes, I think, around 170 from the U.S. We'll have to talk about that as well.
Yeah, but this is a question that came up to me. Like IEA, do they hold any of that oil in strategic petroleum reserve? Do they own a barrel of oil?
No.
Or is this the same as the American Energy Institute recommending a 400 barrel release out of the strategic petroleum reserve?
Well, the International Energy Agency was originally formed because of this, out of the oil price shocks in the 70s, to organize and make sure that every OECD countries had strategic petroleum reserves for this very reason. Now, they obviously lost their way during COVID when they came out and said their job was to make sure we never use oil again. So clearly, it's very hard to take them seriously. But that is what's happening now, is that everybody is supposed to have like 30 days of cover, right? 30 days of demand cover. And so we are now at around, I think it was about 470 million barrels. We had this massive sell-off, obviously, during the Biden administration. The Trump administration has been adding between 400,000 barrels and 700,000 barrels a week that we were adding. And now we will be tapping the SPR. Now, there's a lot of debate on that, about whether we should tap it or not. And the Biden administration absolutely tapped the SPR, not because we didn't have supply, because we were not supply short during the war in Ukraine. And I think that's something we really have to clarify to folks, is that right now, the Strait of Hormuz has never been closed. It is closed right now. Okay. It's never happened. This is unprecedented. The war in Ukraine, we didn't have that, right? We had dislocations in supply in the beginning, and we had oil prices run up to 140 because Russia, the basically second largest producer in the world, waged war on Ukraine. And then people were like, we don't want to buy this, but they continue to buy their oil anyway. So it was all price driven, and Biden, this was really political, right? Use the SPR, lower oil prices. Now what we do have a global supply shortage that is driving up oil prices. So we didn't have the fact that the market, just to go back to your original question, the fact that the market didn't price in any of this is kind of amazing, right? It meant that we didn't really have any geopolitical risk premium in oil prices to begin with. People said we had up to $10. That seemed really high. I don't think we had hardly any priced in. So then, this happens. The market opens that Sunday night on, I think that's March 1st, and nothing happens. I'm watching oil and I'm thinking, okay, hello. And it was like 72, 77, and it dropped back. Nothing was happening. And so what happened, and I know folks are listening to this wanting to know exactly what happened and where we're at. What happened was, I think there was I assume there was a short position on, continued short positions on oil. You had a pretty big short position coming into January on Brent, which kept oil prices suppressed. That's partly why we didn't see a response in geopolitical risk. And so everybody had these short positions on. Well, they had to unwind those, right? And when you have the unwinding of a big short position, then you start having this short covering, and then you start getting this movement. Well, so you had this, and people were basically betting in the first days of this war that this is short-lived, nothing's going to happen. And then you had this, and that to me was ridiculous, because you had the Dubai airport being attacked. And I have people emailing me, telling me they cannot fly in and out of them, air traffic is basically closed. So now you have the IEA coming out today in their report and saying, jet fuel demand is going to be down because of the significant fuel impacts that just coming from the Middle East, because they are not flying. So it is, to me, those are widely big, unprecedented things where we're not talking about, that's a huge issue where we're not demanding this jet fuel. How long is the Strait of Hormuz going to be closed? That's the big question for everyone. And then, I think everybody on the left and the pundits on Bloomberg and the political people want to say, okay, what's the point of this whole thing? Well, there clearly is a point, right? You took out the leader of Iran, and hopefully, there's more degradation to the IRGC, and that basically you pummel, and I'm trying to use be careful with that phrase, but really you pummel Iran and you essentially bring them to the table to say, hey, this isn't, you have to come to the table and you have to surrender. And we don't want you to have nuclear weapons. We don't want you to have missiles. And we want you to stop funding these nefarious organizations. And that's a real serious thing because they're not exporting oil either. Now, they have a lot of oil in the water. That's important to point out, too. They had massive amount of oil in the water. So they are exporting that oil in the water. It is finding homes, and they are making a lot of money right now. Now, how long this can all last and how they're getting that money back is a big question. Also, when this war first started, we do know that Chinese planes were able to get into I believe were able to get into Iran. We don't know what they were dropping off, but we could guess that it's military support.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we're a little bit more insulated than Europe is in this situation, and this is probably a pretty easy question. You even shared the price of natural gas, Henry Hub, and European gas, which I think is trading at least 5 times more expensive than Henry Hub right now. And again, short answer probably here: why are we insulated compared to Europe?
Yeah, that's because we're the single largest producer of natural gas in the entire world by a massive margin. And so, I think that's the biggest one where gas matters. And I had a conversation with a group in Europe today, and I was saying, the exposure to Europe is really, really significant. And so, as an economist,
it's self-inflicted.
It is self-inflicted. And we have to, as an economist, you have to be thinking about recession risks, right? And I'm supportive of taking out the supreme leader of Iran. And I'm like, when we talk about Iran being a threat, all this type of stuff of like just potentially having peace in the Middle East, we absolutely could. We should be thinking about a few months down the road or years down the road what this could look like, and it could be very positive actually for the Middle East. It's hard to do that in the eye of the storm right now, but for Europe, this is a real serious issue. When you have $17 an MCF for Dutch TTF prices, they were hanging at 10 and they thought everything was great. And that they had years of this war in Ukraine to start getting their ducks in a row, to start building up storage. You know how you build up storage? You don't have it in Europe. You produce your own natural gas, right? So that, hey, when this happens, you can say, oh crap, I can't get it from Qatar. And this is to me also really important. And it's, I like, I've met Harold Hamm. He's a nice guy, but I hear a lot of companies talking about going abroad. This is obviously before the war in Iran. But this to me is a proving point. And what I said in that op-ed is that put the dollar in the US, put your drill bit back in the ground here at home. That is the best way to get a return. And so even when prices were a little lower, the risk abroad is so much higher. And so you have rule of law here. We're the largest oil producer in the region, in the world. And we have the ability to produce and export and utilize this crude oil. And so when you're thinking about, continental resources, it was dabbling or thinking about going into Turkey. Turkey doesn't look as great right now, right? They are impacted by all of this. EOG, and been a fan of EOG for a long time. EOG is in Bahrain. Bahrain doesn't look too great right now. I mean, they only produce 44,000 barrels a day, but that's shut in, right? Mm-hmm. So these things this is just geopolitical reality that comes home to roost when it comes home to roost. And so for Europe, they are super exposed to Qatar. Instead of during the Biden administration, when the war in Ukraine was raging, and we said, in the industry, we're lifting up our arms and saying, sign long-term LNG contracts with us, start working with us. The Biden administration didn't want to do that. They put the pause in LNG export facilities. And then, Europe was like, yeah, well, we're going green and we don't want to really do that. And we don't want to sign long-term contracts. And so it didn't happen. So Eni and Repsol and all these guys, all these European companies, they doubled down on the Middle East. And now they're in the pickle that they're in. So, I'm not saying that you could foresee this, but you can foresee conflict in the Middle East. This is a foreseeable thing. It will happen.
So do you think American energy companies are going to respond to these higher prices? And if so, how quickly can they respond? I mean, are we going to see more rigs, more drilling activity?
Yes. So the market, at least from what I'm seeing on Bloomberg and hearing the stock market, is the answer from, and again, it seems to be a little bit of the left. It could be, I could be wrong here, but that's what I'm hearing. A lot the political analysts is saying, "Oh, it doesn't really matter. The U.S. can't respond that quickly." That's not true. That's not what I'm hearing on the ground. I do want to remind folks that if you're listening to this from abroad and you're not in the industry, LNG or natural gas is a very small molecule. We're producing that 134 billion cubic feet per day today, gross withdrawals. We amp that up just from October to November because we increased LNG exports from 15 BCF a day to 20 BCF a day. So if we can do that quickly, that was basically just like you're opening up the valve, right? Because we have so much pent up production ready to go in the US for gas. So on the gas side, absolutely. Like the answer is an easy yes. And that is hugely beneficial for the world because we are helping, we're really helping, desensitize geopolitical risk. And when we add these molecules on the water, we are contributing to lowering that spot price. So that's hugely beneficial. We need to be doing that for the globe and for European allies and others. And it's really good for the US because it sends those signals, those price signals, and then we develop that we continue to keep that market going and we continue to raise output. So I'm less worried about gas. Oil will take a little bit longer, right? Everybody's kind of get their footing and see how long this is. I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I think you have had massive hedging opportunities. Every day you probably get a better hedging opportunity. So if you haven't hedged, like the opportunities to hedge, the opportunities to probably get, and I'm not advising anyone on what to do as a disclaimer. However, if you were to probably see what you're getting for swaps or even, you're probably getting very, very decent prices and you could probably get it a year out. That means that those operators that are doing that are going to be very comfortable, right? They're going to be very comfortable for several months. And so when people say we can't increase output, well, look what happened from the war in Ukraine and the resulting price increase. We are now at 14 million barrels a day of production. So yes, we will increase output. And at the least, we're not going to drop, right? So everybody was calling for peak shale and a decline in output and year-over-year declines potentially in 2026. Well, that's not happening. The question is that, are we bringing rigs back? We're going to be running frac fleets flat out. We're going to be running rigs flat out. But then are you going to be bringing equipment back? What's available to bring back? Have we invested in, we invested in equipment enough? And probably not, right? Because the service sector for the past couple of years has been beaten down pretty hard where they've had to give a lot of price breaks to producers. And now we have to see investment back into that space. And so that takes a little bit of time. But I always say you be very careful of counting the industry out. One, the US, because you will be able to increase output probably quicker than you think. And two, even in the world is that, I don't want to downplay the atrocities and everything that's happening in the Middle East, but we're looking at when you're seeing the attacks in Bahrain, you're seeing the attacks to Oman, you're seeing the attacks to Kuwait, you're seeing the attacks to Saudi Arabia, all these guys, and this is really sad and terrible, but all these guys are actively looking to maneuver where they can maneuver their crude and export it from somewhere else, right? That may take a few weeks, but if this is sustained and then Iran has to focus their efforts on the Strait of Hormuz, then they move around this. And I'm not saying this is quick or easy, but we tend to overestimate, just like on Venezuela saying that they could produce quickly, right? Mm-hmm. And then just like we overestimated on that, we tend to overestimate, back in the 90s with the Kuwaiti oil fires, people thought it would take years to put out those fires. And it actually took months. And then that production came back online. And so we have to be very cautious about that, of thinking about the market trajectory. And I say that because this is what these guys do for a living, right? And this is really bad. But I also think that the longer this is sustained, so Iran attacked its own people. They killed up to 40,000 of their own people. That is the highest numbers, by the way, we have seen since World War II. Unbelievable atrocities within Iran. Nobody on TV is talking about that now, which is really depressing. And they're also just like the attacks that Iran is attacking its regional neighbors. They're attacking Qatar. They're attacking Bahrain. They're attacking Saudi Arabia. So all these countries that they're in with, that to me is not sustainable. And so how long you can continue to attack your regional allies and them just sit back and take it because they don't want to escalate this. At some point, they're going to say, screw it. Like, we got to stop this. And then Iran's in a pickle, right? If it's the US and the West coming together, and even our Western allies that may have said they don't want to, I know I know the UK, Starmer was not wanting to participate in this, and then he changed his mind. We weren't even allowed to use their bases for this. France came in to get involved. So I think the risk is that, they
Spain's
are
still sitting on the sidelines, and the president is threatening cutting off all trade with Spain.
Yeah. It's Spain. They're a pretty tiny
Yeah.
country. So and it just this is something that you have to be thinking about a little both medium and long term. And I don't think this is a sustainable course for Iran. We don't know who's leading Iran. This is clearly the hardliners going crazy and having a field day. And this is the situation that we're in right now. But could we overwhelm this? Could this be overwhelmed and we basically constrain it? Absolutely. And I think this is where the administration, again, I don't know, but I think that they're looking at this and they're gonna give this a few weeks to play out.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about LNG. I was just down in Corpus Christi a couple of weeks ago. Chris Wright and President Trump were there doing an energy dominance rally in the port of Corpus Christi. My understanding is they were there to celebrate the approval of a new permit for Cheniere to expand their LNG exporting facility, which is going to increase LNG exports from the United States. How quickly and there's a lot of these LNG tankers that are also at sea right now, and their destinations are changing. How rapidly do you think that the U.S. can fill in some of this LNG demand throughout Europe?
So I think that, like I was saying before, I'm not worried about the production. I think that's quick. So it's on paper. Can we max out our nameplate? Absolutely. So I think we could add several BCF a day quick, right? We could max out that nameplate capacity. We went to 20 BCF a day without blinking. So we can do that. So if it's a few BCF a day to 5 BCF a day, pretty quick, not concerned about that. A little more concerned about, are the vessels available, right? Do we have the LNG tankers actually available? You're hearing everybody and their dog talk about the Jones Act today. Now, we've never had the Strait of Hormuz actually closed, and it is now effectively closed. We've also, every time somebody's wanted to repeal the Jones Act, it's never happened. And so at least in my entire career, when oil was being produced in the early days of the shale boom, people wanted to lift the Jones Act and they didn't, right? And so Jones Act requires you to use U.S. flagged vessels, manned and flagged vessels on U.S. ports. It would help to lift that, and it would help to sort of let just the maneuvering of ships. The trouble with this is that these ships are run on diesel, and diesel prices are through the roof now. And so the cost of doing this is not just the tanker rates are, I think 12x is what IEA has said today. Tanker rates are massively through the roof. Your diesel prices are through the roof. And so the cost of moving boat, whether it's diesel or oil or whether it's LNG, has really skyrocketed. And that's partly what you're seeing, when we saw in the war in Ukraine and we saw LNG going to Europe and we saw those very high LNG prices. Part of that was because, and we saw this pull in diesel prices. Part of that was because they were pulling on diesel prices, right? You had this new demand for LNG that was going to Europe, and that's what was happening. So this is where we have to learn from our mistakes, right? We shouldn't have been in this position, like in terms of we should have had kind of ample supply and made sure we had enough of this. Wasn't quite quickly enough from the war in Ukraine for us to, and Trump being in office, to really have enough time to build ships and do all this stuff. You need time to do this, and he's only been in office a year. But we learned some really hard lessons from the war in Ukraine, and the Biden administration didn't do anything, right? They basically just sat on their butts, released crude from the SPR, and basically said, hey, let's buy crude from Iran because it's okay. We won't need crude intent. We won't be demanding this in the long term. And I do want to remind folks that this is a really cautious tale. And I don't hear anybody in the stock market saying, hey, maybe part of the reason that we're in the pickle that we are in is because Europe and everybody is still believing that we don't need this. We don't need crude oil. It's amazing to see everyone. That's what the entire stock market, every single morning, every single night if what you're watching, it's all about oil right now. And 5 years ago, we were moving away from oil, and that was dead and done and dusted. And now everybody's focused on it because we're back above $100 a barrel. And it just proves that it's really, really important.
Yeah, and I'm glad the Jones Act is back in media attention and media coverage. This is something I've been writing about and advocating for the elimination of for over a decade now, because it is those U.S. flagged vessels, U.S. manned vessels, U.S. manufactured vessels. There's no large LNG vessels that are manufactured in the United States. There are some smaller scale ones. But just in the last couple of weeks, Gavin Newsom has had to import fuel because they have shortages. They've gone from nearly or close to 40 refineries now down to, I think, 8, with 2 slated to close in the next few months. So they're crushing themselves. This is all self-inflicted. They've had to import fuel from other countries, like through the Bahamas, and they're paying the cost of that. So I think this temporary suspension of the Jones Act, which has happened at least 6 times this century, 5 of those were for hurricane or weather related,
Right.
short term. We're talking 7 days to 2 weeks. Timeframes where it's suspended. I think it needs to be completely eliminated. But this could be President Trump handing a little silver spoon to Gavin Newsom, the guy that has one certainly his entire life. He's now going to help reduce the fuel cost in California, even though they've been self-inflicted wounding themselves for years now with some of their crazy so-called climate policies.
Well, yeah, I mean, California, and this is why I try to bring this home. I was talking about, why it's so important to be talking about this. Of like, yes, everybody's talking about oil now, and we've been beating on this drum. And I said, oil prices were not high enough. They weren't high enough for an entire year because this geopolitical risk was so real. And so when people ask me about geopolitical risk now, and I say, it's war now, right? This is real. This is what you have. And so California, they're shutting down those refineries, but they're super exposed to imports. I believe, if I don't know off the top of my head what PAD 5, they are Petroleum Administration Defense District. That's what they're called. It's a holdover from World War II. That's the refinery district is PAD 5. That's California. They've reduced their refining capacity because Gavin Newsom and the state of California doesn't want to be an oil and gas state. They don't want to refine any crude because these climate regulations. Well, this is a big problem for their gasoline prices. They don't want to import any crude from the U.S. when we're producing a ton of crude. And so they've been super exposed on oil imports from abroad. And so when the war in Ukraine happened, they were taking like 500,000 barrels a day from Russia, and they had to supplant that. Well, I believe they were probably taking crude, I'm guessing, from Iraq. And, they take it from other places. Well,
that's their largest source is Iraqi oil. 21% of their oil comes from Iraq. 20% comes from, is it Venezuela or maybe, no, it's Brazil. 20% comes from Brazil.
Yep.
So and it's just, and they're standing on top of it. It's just absolutely absurd.
Oh no, it's like they're standing on top of oil, and that Iraqi crude. Well, they're not getting that anymore. So this comes to the point where, and this is where I think the industry needs to do a good job of saying, okay, we're here for you. We are producing oil and gas. We have been the whole time, and we will ramp it up for you. But also get the policies right, folks. Like, come on. And people need to eat and live, and they still need to eat and live in California. And so it's just amazing is that you can't, they've done everything wrong. And this is when people need to be speaking about this of, you cannot go down this track any further. And being exposed to imports, this is what happens. And you can never be completely energy independent, but you can be damn close, and you can be energy resilient, and you can be, energy dominant. And that is the policies of this administration. And I would also just like to say, I pointed out in that op-ed is that, look, the benefits to the U.S., and I'm not like, we're going to have some concerns with obviously $100 oil. That is problematic, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But we were too low. We were in this kind of 60s range. And so U.S. shale would have been fine at 70, or would have been doing a lot better at 70. And so we needed these higher prices. And this is where I think the stock market's also gotten it wrong, is that $3.50 gasoline, it's not tanking the U.S. economy, okay? Like, that's not going to do it, right? You have to lose jobs, and you have to have lots of other inflation to do this. And historically speaking, we do not always have high oil prices and inflation. Under the Biden administration, we absolutely did. But we've had previous bouts of high oil prices, as we did in 2008. Now, we had a recession then, but we did not have inflation. So you can have high oil prices without inflation. You have to, and so everybody's now talking about inflation and all this stuff, maybe, right? But when you have high oil prices and actual war, you can have a recession as well. And then you take off that demand, and then you have, demand issues, and you can have recession. But this $3.50 gasoline prices, that is not detrimental to the U.S. economy. I know it's impactful because we've had so much inflation from the previous administration. And the Trump administration has been very clear that they want lower oil prices because that is their mechanism to really, it can immediately help people. And so, yes, people are going to see a short-term spike at the pump. But again, if this is like a month or 2 months, it's sort of like having, it's not the same, but it's sort of like having the government shut down for a month or 2 months. You absolutely have an impact to the economy, but once the government gets reopened again, you kind of snap back. And you can see that if we have this short-term spike in oil prices, and then it goes back down.
Yeah, for every 25 cents increase at the pump, it's about 1 cent per mile for the average commuter, the average, car driver. But you get into the heavy duty trucks and the diesel, you're getting closer to 2 cents per mile. Right. And that's when it really starts to add up. And that's everything that you and I are going to consume, live in today, that we're going to talk to at one point in time has been in or on a truck.
Yep.
And so the trucks and diesel moves America, moves our economy, and you start to increase their costs significantly, then you and I start to feel that pinch at the bottom. But again, every 25 cents increase at the pump is about 1 cent per mile. So you're right. It's not hurting the consumer as much as some people would like to believe, but it just cracks me up that the media on the left and Democrats around the country are now talking about this when they were nowhere. When Biden got price of oil up to $120 a barrel of oil, gasoline at the pump and diesel were much more expensive, and he didn't free Iran from a radical Islamic terrorist.
Right.
He just did it all on his own through policy.
And then they used the SPR as a piggy bank. And, to release it. And then it's called a strategic petroleum reserve. And, I think people are debating this now and saying we shouldn't do it. This is when now, if we don't need to, I'm okay with saving it. But this is when you do use it, right? You actually do have supplies that are cut off, right? And so would probably be more helping our allies with this and helping oil prices with this. But that's also why you have an SPR. We're the leader of the free world. And I've long said you have to refill the SPR because we may not need it, but our allies might, right? And you will have conflict. And so it's really important is that when we have this massive SPR, China has probably easily north of 2 billion barrels in strategic petroleum in their strategic reserves, right? And they have as much refining capacity as we do, right? They're not hurting. And so we are probably going to use a little bit of our SPR, unlike the Biden administration when they used it and they did it to lower prices. We didn't have
right before an election. It's so funny because here we are, we're several months away from November elections, and they're saying, "Oh, President Trump's draining it to lower prices." Like you said, it's really helping people more around the world than it is here in America.
Exactly.
And then I've even seen reports that it got damaged while Biden was draining it so rapidly that the reserve is not just one tank. It's caverns. It's a lot of tanks. It needs to be maintained. And this is something that the left has not wanted us to do at all. We haven't been directing funds to maintain our grid. We've been dumping them in wind, solar, and batteries, which are massively to magnitudes more expensive and to the same magnitudes less reliable. And so the SPR wasn't maintained, and now it needs to be maintained and quite refilled when prices drop back down.
Yeah, and this is, I think it's really important is I haven't seen the direct things that the administration said, but when it first came out that they were willing to think about the SPR, they said with commitments to refill it. And so, and I think that's important, but that's partly if the people are thinking about oil prices is saying, are they going to go back to where they were before? Maybe not. I'm not saying they can't, there's a lot of things that can happen with oil prices. And you could have a quick resolution and output goes back up and prices go back down. However, with what's happened and the shut-ins and the fact that we are going to be using SPRs and we should refill them, no, you shouldn't be going back down to those 60s anytime soon, which is, going back to in the 70s and 80s, that would probably be fine for the economy. And I'm not downplaying this because I've been long since, when people ask me, why the Trump administration was so focused on oil prices, there was a clear reason. And that was because it is the one mechanism that you see so quickly, right? You feel it at the pump really quickly. Now people see that electricity prices as well. But it is very telling that the left is going nuts on, high gasoline prices. And it's also very telling that the Trump administration, for all they're committed to lower prices, but they're still willing to see through this war. And I think that's really very important, is saying, okay, you don't want somebody just turn-tailing really quickly, right? You want them to see through it and be clear-eyed about it and then say, okay, and we will address the oil part. And we produce 14 million barrels a day. So I think that's really important. And just to put a finer point on this is that when we were selling off the SPR under the Biden administration, there was no talk of refilling it, right? There was no plan to refill it. And so that was really just a haphazard way of policymaking, right? Is that you had this aggressive climate policymaking. You had, we are going green. We're not going to need oil anyway. So might as well fill it up, use it all up, do whatever you want. And it was just crazy. It was silly. It was willy-nilly. It was, we can be friends with Iran and we can just use our SPR and who cares? And we'll just do this because we won't need it in the future. And that was so short-sighted. And so I hope at the very least, this brings people back to our understanding that geopolitics really matter, that U.S. oil production really matters, that U.S. American energy really, really matters, and that we have to be focused on this even when prices are low, when prices are high, of maintaining U.S. energy. And so it goes from, yes, fueling up your pump and gasoline, oil production and gasoline, but it also goes to electricity and our natural gas, and making sure that we are not caught short-sighted like Europe is, and that we have the flexibility and maneuverability.
I think it's great that Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy, is doing these emergency orders through his powers that he has to keep coal-fired power plants online and running, which is saving states like Indiana and Illinois and others
Craig,
in the Midwest
I believe
and West Virginia.
Craig, Colorado got it. My hometown got the, and that's a big deal to my hometown. My mom texted me that, and it was, I can't tell you how happy that made me. I mean, this is a really, really big deal, saving these small towns, not just saving them from saving the economy, but also just giving them a lifeline to figure out what to do and how to move forward, but also not taking away their power, their ability to actually turn their lights on.
Yeah, and I'm in Montana right now. I've been to some towns in Montana that have just been devastated by a radical alarmist environmental activist. Towns that have been destroyed that used to have operating and functioning mines, whether they were coal or gold or other critical minerals or valuable things that have just been decimated. And these towns are barely alive now. It's really depressing to see. They could come back if we have the right policies in place, but keeping these coal power plants running is incredible. It's allowing more natural gas to hit the open market, the global market, which I think is better for the producers of gas. And we need to be doing more coal-fired electricity here in the United States so that we can get more of it out to our friends and allies around the world. And so you touched a little bit about what policy, how important policy is. What can policymakers take from this conversation and the conflict in Iran right now, and what can they learn from this experience about energy here in the United States?
So, I mean, it's kind of everything we've been talking about, but it's a really good question, because I think I heard Ursula von der Leyen from the European Union talk about this I think it was last night, and maybe in the last couple of days she commented, and she said, literally, I think her quote was something to the effect of, we have not seen nuclear prices or renewable prices go up, but we have seen all the other prices go up. So why would we want to go back to fossil fuels and Russian fossil fuels? And I thought, that is such a naive statement, right? That is such a naive statement of, well, you shouldn't be going back to Russian anything. But the fact that you call them fossil and they're just, labeling them as so evil is that, you've never weaned yourself off in the first place, one. So your increase of wind and solar did not change your need for these other products, right? Because you drive with oil, and, it's small, right? These are smaller economies, so they don't consume as much oil as we do, but it's not the savior, right? It doesn't save them. And it's been detrimental to their economies because they have the highest electricity prices in the world. So, and you can't produce anything. You can't make anything. So for us, I think for the U.S., it's so important to realize that this is giving a moment of clarity for everyone to say, oh my gosh, high oil prices. What do we do? The Strait of Hormuz is actually closed. This was our worst fear, and it's happened. And by the way, if we're at $100 oil and the Strait of Hormuz is closed, I have to say, and I say that's pretty incredible, because I think a lot of people would have thought we would have been 150, 175, closer to $200 a barrel with the Strait of Hormuz closed, and we're not. So I do want to remind folks that there's a lot of trading going on, a massive amount. The fact that I talked about that round trip in oil prices from 120 closer to 80, and you have $40 swings. When we lost a lot of love in trading during COVID for WTI, for West Texas Intermediate, since then, you've had just this kind of muted trading, and now everybody is trading with vengeance, and you have short covering and you have wild swings. And so I just want to caution folks that trading is not the same as supply and demand fundamentals. And so we have to be careful with that. We do not have a lot of color of what is actually happening in the Middle East, how much oil is flowing, what's going on, who's actually leading Iran. It's a mess. And the fact that it's a mess, and we know all the things that we just said, and we have $96 oil. I'm not saying $96 oil is good for the consumer. I am saying I'm surprised it's not higher. So I absolutely am. And so this should be a clarion call for global policymakers, but particularly for the U.S. is how important U.S. oil and gas production is, how important it is to maintain that. I love that you were talking about coal, because, even though we're not talking about coal right now in this conflict, That's what China's run on, right? That's what our long-term adversary is run on. And, this should be a moment to refocus and say, let's get this right. Let's produce every bit of energy we can so that we have low energy prices. I mean, the reason we have $3.24 natural gas and Europe is paying $17.20 is because we produce so much damn natural gas. I am super proud of that. And that is it's awesome. And we are literally saving the asses of our allies across the world with our natural gas. And so that the answer should be to focus on to actually get energy dominance right, to actually do it right, is to understand we have to maintain it. And that's the stuff we were kind of missing, I think, before this in the run up to the war when you asked about how come we weren't pricing this in, is because no one was looking at all this, right? No one was looking at the whole picture, and people just think traders get it right. And they weren't, right? They weren't properly assessing this geopolitical risk. And now we have it. And now we're here.
I love that you mentioned Ursula, the head of the EU. She posted something 2 days ago on her X account. It says Europe needs homegrown, low carbon energy sources. That's a political agenda. That's bending the knee to the climate cult. And she says nuclear and renewables together have a key role to play. Nuclear energy is available around the clock, providing electricity all year. And then I love it because some readers added context. It was Ursula's party responsible for the nuclear phase out in Germany.
Yep.
And on October 25th, 2025, the last cooling towers were demolished. So this is someone that, that was last year. I mean, we're talking months ago. Yeah. And here she is saying they have an important key role to play. I mean, it reminds me of Larry Fink, who was on Bret Baier on Fox News last night. Apparently they have a big podcast coming out together. Bret Baier is going to, release a full recording. But Larry Fink was talking, he's using the all of the above language without saying all of the above, and how people have become pragmatic. But he's saying that we need all energy sources right now. And that's not true. We need what works. We need what's affordable and reliable. And here in the United States, right now, that's natural gas. If we were going to be building any new electric generation, it would be natural gas, because that's what's affordable and reliable. I wish we could build more coal. It's been demonized. The permitting takes forever. States have phase out requirements. But it just drives me crazy. And then Larry goes on to praise China because they're building so much wind and solar right now. I about spit taked when I saw the video. I'm going to post it later on my Substack because it's hilarious, because China is massively, massively building coal to meet their energy needs, something that we should be doing here in the United States.
And more than energy needs. They're building massively to prepare for the conflict. And I'm not warmongering here, folks. This is what you don't have 10,000 terawatt hours of power generation. You don't have 1/3 of the world's power generation for kicks and giggles. You do it because you're the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. And they're making the stuff, they're trying to send it to Iran. I think they've been impacted by it, but Russia's come out and said they're supporting Iran. China is supporting Iran. China buys every bit that Iran exports of their crude oil. They're directly supporting this. And yet no one's talking about China right now. I mean, the first question should have been, hey, China, stop importing Iranian crude oil, right? Easy, right? Stop doing that, right? And stop doing this, and maybe, hey, use some of your SPR. They're not going to do that. So no, these are really, really serious things that all the above drives me absolutely nuts. And I was in DC early in February, and then I was talking to folks there. And then I was at NAPE and talking to folks in Houston. I was really surprised on February 18th that the biggest talk and biggest question at NAPE on that panel was not about Iran and oil prices and what was going to happen. I was blown away and said, how come we're not talking about Iran? The fact that nobody was talking about these 30 to 40,000 people dead in Iran, and these were the largest massacres we've seen since World War II. And people were, in this run up to this conflict, in this run up to us, killing the leader of Iran, people said, "Oh, this is Iraq all over again." No, it wasn't. No, it's not. I mean, you didn't have it's not the same at all. It's very, very different, and so it really down to me diminished all these people that have died, and it just diminishes when I'm listening to podcasts and stuff, and they are defending Iran and saying they are fighting for their right to, and they're not fighting for the right to, the regime is fighting for the right to continue, but they're not fighting for the people, right? And actually, when their BBC is talking to people on the ground, the little bit coverage of they're getting, because they still have a full internet blackout, the people say that, they're not blaming the US. supportive or not supportive, that's maybe a question mark, but they blame their regime. They blame their own leadership for this.
Mhm.
And that's important because BBC does tilt, one direction. And the fact that they're even saying this, that is really telling, right? Is the people on the ground are blaming their leadership for this. And I think it's so important to say, before this conflict started, before this war in Iran happened, they were killing their own people to the tens of thousands because the people were protesting, because their way of life had diminished. And now Iran's reaction in conflict is to target their regional allies. And there's no and so this is where we're at. You want to know how they're gonna act. You want to know how China's gonna act in conflict and in war. This is how they're gonna act. It is not fair. It is not by rules of war. It is messy. It is dirty. It is horrible.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you're right. BBC, and I give praise where praise is due, and it's hard sometimes because some of these networks deserve very, very little praise. But BBC, I've even seen on ABC and Bloomberg interviewing Iranians who have fled their country because they were persecuted, are celebrating the Ayatollah's death. They're celebrating this movement
it's
towards
been
freedom,
massively
and
celebrated.
they're hopeful for the first time in nearly 50 years that they can go back to the beautiful country that they once were before this takeover by radical Islamists. So it is exciting to see them hopeful, but it is exciting for some of these networks to actually be covering the hope that these people have, and knowing that they've lost friends and family over the last few months. Again, up to 40,000 people have been murdered by this regime, their own citizens. But it just proves that Iran and China, it further evidence that China could care less about human rights.
Absolutely.
Great. And we've talked about this. I've talked about this for years, how they own and control over 75% of the cobalt mines in Africa. They've got kids between the ages of 4 and 13, over 40,000 kids reported, according to UNICEF, working in these cobalt mines. It just in terrible, just awful conditions. And now the Wall Street Journal reported, it was just recently, March 9th, investigators say Chinese cobalt plant sickened Congo town. They don't care about emissions. They had people reportedly passing out in some of the refineries because of sulfur dioxide. Other people in the villages coughing up blood because of pollution that causes health issues at certain concentrations. Something that we could not even fathom here in the United States is happening in Africa and in the Congo, in Chinese owned and controlled facilities. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about environmental protection. Thank God we do. We have an administration that actually cares about human rights and is going in there, again, warning them months ago, if you kill your citizens, we are locked and loaded. Well, we're locked and we're unloading now, as we should say, because we are taking out their leaders, targets on their backs, and it's great to defend humanity.
Yeah, and and I say this very honestly too, is because I was listening to Bloomberg Surveillance and I was listening to BBC and some others to catch up on stuff, and there was this kind of criticism tilt on the left of criticizing, before the Trump administration had decided to attack Iran. They said, "Oh, well, you told the people you were coming," so there was criticism that he wasn't doing. Everybody said that he did come, right? The Trump administration chose to act on this, and they did. They did do this. And to your point on China, they have 1 to 3 million, probably more, Uyghurs in forced labor, if not more. And people always say this is in the province of Xinjiang. They put these people on buses and they send them across China for forced labor, right? So no, they have no human rights standards, and and it doesn't mean
Where are
that
the
people
protesters?
Right. Exactly. And so part of their deals with these countries is because they look away from human rights. That's not part of their deals, right? Whereas we look at it, or we should be looking at it. And in Iran, they don't have that. And these people are, I'm not saying now it's hard to look through the fog of war, right? It is really difficult, but you do have to be thinking about from what's going to happen next, from an economic standpoint, from what's going to happen, and potentially what this could mean for the Middle East is very positive, right? A different regime in Iran, a different leadership, or even a downplay or quelling of this extreme IRGC, this extreme by the government of the Revolutionary Guards. This could be game changing for the people of Iran. This is a prosperous people that don't want to live like this way, that just want jobs, that want prosperity. And the regime was not giving the money that they were making from their over 5 million barrels a day oil production and exports, and 2 to 3 million barrels to China. That wasn't going to the people. That was going to all this stuff, all these bombings and everything. That's where the money's going. That's why the people are upset. And so this is such a big deal, is that this is what I'm not hearing about. where was the money going? And people were all talking about, well, high oil prices. Well, hello, they were exporting 3 million barrels a day to China, and all the money was going to these bad actors. This is why we're doing this, right? And that is not okay. And so I'm very okay with what we're doing. I hope we get the next leader out, the guy that's injured or whoever we know who is actually running the show right now. But yeah, it's messy now. We're in the fog of war right now, but the prospects are potentially positive. Hard to say that right now because it's really messy. But I think listeners, and I know my listeners are probably saying, okay, so tell me where are we going from here? I mean, no one has a crystal ball. We're at $96 a barrel. We've had incredible volatility in prices. Everyone's talking about, what's the pain point? How long can we stay here? And I would say, look, if we're at $96 a barrel and we effectively have the Strait of Hormuz closed, we've got 8 to 10 million barrels a day offline. I think oil prices should actually be a little higher. But it's how long can we maintain this? And I really think the question is, how long do Middle East players maintain their pause and their response to Iran, which I don't think can be long lasted.
Yeah. Let's just hope they get rid of anybody from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps there. That the RGC should not be involved in the leadership of that country whatsoever.
Well, there's a lot of that. It's a lot. We're talking. I think it's 150,000. It's hard, but you could if you change say, okay, this isn't going to be tolerated, you can quell that, right? People go where the money goes. People go where the wind is blowing, and so when the far the hardliners are able to do what they're doing, this is what they're doing. But that doesn't always have to be the case.
Yeah, no, sure doesn't.
All right.
Well, what else closing thoughts do you have, Trish?
I mean, I think I've got all of them out, or as many as I can from my head out on paper or out on this recording. So for folks who thought I had not spoken in a while, I hope this is helpful for everyone because there's a lot. This is super evolving. I do think that the role of China is not being talked about at all and will be increasingly talked about. I know that people are probably thinking about Russia and that crude and all this crude on the water. It's billions of barrels that we had of this ample crude. So partly why oil prices are not as high as people think maybe they should be is because we had all this crude on the water that is going to find a home. India was going to buy it, whether we gave them the waivers or not. Everybody they're going to buy up whatever they can. And so you're going to see every barrel get sopped up. You are going to see Russian output probably, or could go up and Russian exports go up. So there are a lot of implications with this. This is an absolutely moving target. I am absolutely willing to evolve and adjust my thinking and analysis accordingly as I will do, and be as much of an honest broker about this as I can, and obviously give my analytical opinions and clearly my spicy opinions where needed.
Great. Well, I just like to say I'd love for people to pay attention to the American Energy Institute. We should be launching research here in the next couple of days exposing the Federal Judicial Center and their partnership with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and how they have been corrupted by the climate alarmist on the left. And plaintiffs' attorneys are actually writing judicial education materials. We've got a lot more exposure on that. We've been writing about it for a couple of months now. We should be publishing our report here early sometime next week. So pay attention, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason. And yes, we will have more stuff coming in the queue. We'll get snippets out as well. Please share this with your colleagues and friends. You can reach out to PetroNerds on PetroNerds.com, and you can reach out to American Energy Institute on the website as well. As a reminder, folks, I am the CEO of PetroNerds and the host of the PetroNerds Podcast, and I am also the chief economist and proud of being the chief economist with the American Energy Institute. So thank you so much for your time, Jason, and enjoy the rest of your time in Montana.
Thank you, Tricia. Appreciate it. Keep living the high carbon lifestyle.
All right. Bye, folks.